The galaxy had never known peace. It had, instead, mastered the art of a delicate, almost comfortable chaos, an ever-shifting balance maintained by the Galactic Council. This council, composed of representatives from the 12 most advanced and powerful species, presided over nearly 100 star systems. Each species contributed resources, expertise, and, most importantly, discipline to a treaty that kept the galactic borders intact. Yet, beneath the appearance of order, ambition simmered, often spilling over into covert missions and assassinations carried out in the Council's shadow. On the edge of the Telsarin Nebula, a place of raw cosmic beauty and deadly radiation, one such assassin prepared for their next mission. Kyra Sinkar, a name whispered with fear in the deepest corners of the galaxy, sat alone in her dimly lit ship, the Spectre's Edge. Her eyes, a piercing shade of silver, scanned her datapad with cold efficiency. She was known among the Council's ranks as the finest assassin the galaxy had ever produced, a title she had earned through a series of high-profile, untraceable hits on Council rivals and insubordinate factions. Her latest mission, however, was unique in a way she hadn't encountered before. The target's image flickered on the screen. A human, male, mid-30s, with dark eyes that seemed to hold a spark of defiance, even in the still image. His name was Draven Hale, a former military strategist from Earth who had somehow gained access to Council secrets and was rumored to be gathering allies from the Outer Rim colonies. To Kyra's knowledge, Earth was a planet populated by a relatively young, volatile species that had only recently begun venturing beyond their solar system. She had never taken an assignment involving humans before, and she found herself intrigued, though she wouldn't admit it. The briefing described Draven as a skilled tactician, known for unpredictable strategies and an unusual resistance to standard coercion method. He had survived 2 prior attempts on his life, which had prompted the Council to escalate the situation and hire Kyra. Her task was simple: eliminate Draven Hale before he could build any further alliances and destabilize the Council's authority. But Kyra knew that no assignment was ever truly simple. Assassinations, especially high-profile ones, required patience, precision, and an almost surgical approach. She relished the challenge, the thrill of weaving through obstacles, slipping past security systems, and outsmarting her target. To her, the art of assassination was both a craft and a calling, a purpose she had honed over the decades. She lived for the anticipation, the high-stakes game of deception and mastery. As her ship drifted through the nebula, her thoughts turned briefly to her past, a subject she rarely allowed herself to dwell on. Kyra belonged to the Solarii, a species known for their exceptional agility and heightened senses. The Solarii were revered for their speed, and Kyra had taken that to another level, training from a young age in the covert arts under the guidance of the Council's best operatives. Her rise had been meteoric, each successful mission cementing her status and feeding the legend of the Spectral Blade, a moniker earned after her first string of impossible hits. The galaxy feared her, respected her, and ultimately, relied on her. But with each mission, a strange emptiness had crept into her life, filling the moments between her assignments with a hollow feeling she couldn't quite understand. She had no family, no alliances of her own. The Council was her only connection, a distant, faceless employer whose interest in her was purely transactional. She lived and breathed her missions, and perhaps, in a way, that was why she accepted this latest assignment with a faint sense of curiosity. The datapad beeped, and a message flashed on the screen, snapping her from her thoughts. Coordinates confirmed. Planet designation: Xian 7. Target is currently in hiding on the surface. Location secured by local mercenaries. Kyra's lips curved into a thin smile. Xian 7 was an outpost world in the Outer Rim, a rugged, lawless place where all manner of beings converged for trade, smuggling, and other unsavory pursuits. It was the ideal place for someone like Draven Hale to evade the Council's watchful eye. And yet, he would not evade her. The Spectre's Edge descended toward Xian 7, slicing through its thick atmosphere with ease. Below her lay a sprawling, rust-colored landscape dotted with sparse settlements and sprawling marketplaces. As she descended, she activated her cloaking system, her ship vanishing from sight as she made her way to the coordinates provided. Her approach was meticulous, calculated. She moved through the chaotic streets of Xian 7's central hub, a place filled with merchants peddling exotic goods, mercenaries with eyes sharp and hands ready, and civilians trying to survive in the harsh environment. Her movements were smooth and practiced, her Solarii reflexes allowing her to slip through the crowd with ease, unnoticed and invisible. As she reached her vantage point, she observed her target's location, a modest, inconspicuous building on the outskirts of the hub. Draven's hired mercenaries guarded the perimeter, but she noted their positions, weaknesses, and potential entry points with a trained eye. These were not the elite operatives she was used to evading, and she almost felt a pang of disappointment at the ease with which she could bypass them. Once inside, she crept through the dim corridors, her every sense attuned to her surroundings. She could hear the muffled sounds of voices ahead, the low hum of machinery, the faint scent of metal and engine grease. Her pulse quickened as she approached the room where Draven was reportedly hiding. But as she reached the door, a strange feeling washed over her, a warning, perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of hesitation. She dismissed it, pressing forward with her plan, though she couldn't shake the sense that something about this mission was different. She had faced targets with heightened security, advanced technology, and formidable defenses, yet this assignment felt unpredictable. With a swift, silent motion, she pushed the door open, stepping into the dimly lit room. Her eyes locked onto the man sitting calmly at the far end, his gaze already fixed on her. Draven Hale was alone, unarmed, and yet he radiated a quiet intensity that unsettled her. "I've been expecting you," he said, his voice steady, his expression unreadable. Kyra narrowed her eyes, sizing him up. She was a master at reading people, at finding the smallest hint of fear or weakness, but Draven's face betrayed nothing. He looked at her not with fear or defiance, but with a calm acceptance that left her momentarily off balance. "You're remarkably calm for a man about to die," she replied, her voice cool and controlled. Draven's lips quirked into a faint smile. "I know who you are, Kyra Sinkar. The Council's finest weapon, the Solarii assassin they send when no one else can get the job done." "Then you know why I'm here," she said, raising her weapon, her eyes fixed on him. But Draven remained unflinching, his gaze unwavering. "Tell me, Kyra, do you ever wonder why you do this? Why you follow the Council's orders without question?" The question caught her off guard. She had trained herself to ignore distractions, to focus solely on her objective, yet something in his tone, his manner, struck a chord deep within her.
"This isn't about me," she replied sharply. "Your actions threaten the stability of the Council, and for that, you've been marked." Draven held her gaze, his expression softening. "Perhaps the Council's stability isn't as solid as they would have us believe. Maybe that's why they're so afraid of a single human gathering allies on the outskirts." She felt her resolve waver, a rare crack in her armor as his words echoed in her mind. It was true that she had never questioned her orders, had never paused to consider the Council's motives. To her, they had always been the authority, the force that upheld order in a chaotic galaxy. But now, as she stood before Draven, his words igniting a small ember of doubt, she found herself struggling to maintain her focus. This was a complication she hadn't anticipated, a challenge unlike any she had faced before. And as she raised her weapon, her mind buzzed with questions she hadn't dared to ask.
Kyra Sinkar's return to the Spectre's Edge was anything but peaceful. The short encounter with Draven Hale had left her with a new burden she was unaccustomed to carrying: doubt. His calm defiance lingered in her mind, gnawing at the edges of her focus like an itch she couldn't scratch. The Council's finest assassin, questioning herself, it was almost laughable. She brushed it off, focusing on her next objective: gathering information on Draven's allies and dismantling any network he might have constructed in the galaxy's far reaches. Yet the conversation with Draven had planted seeds she couldn't easily uproot. She knew her assignment was to eliminate him, but something felt incomplete. It was as if he had been waiting for her, not to escape but to speak. She could still hear his words, subtle yet laced with conviction. Kyra turned her ship toward the outer rim, where the Council had hinted Draven might have formed alliances with various species opposed to their rule. Zaloria 9 was her next destination, a planet known for its aggressive local government and technological advancements. Draven's influence had reportedly spread to a small but powerful faction there, a faction determined to undermine the Council's influence over their planetary trade routes. Zaloria 9 would be the perfect test of her resolve, her skill, and her ability to neutralize whatever network Draven had built. The journey through Zaloria's asteroid belt was treacherous, with chunks of rock large enough to tear apart even the most fortified ships. Kyra piloted the Spectre's edge through the belt with precision, weaving around the obstacles as her mind calculated each maneuver. But there was no time for caution once she descended into Zaloria's dense atmosphere, skimming over its vast cityscape of interconnected towers, skyways, and industrial districts sprawling beneath her like a metallic jungle. She'd barely touched down in the city of Kareth before she sensed she was being watched. Her instincts went into overdrive, scanning the bustling, metallic streets and towering buildings. The people of Zaloria 9, tall and almost insectoid in appearance, moved with a coordinated, mechanical grace, their exoskeletons gleaming under the neon lights. She hadn't taken 5 steps when a sharp whistle caught her attention, and a cloaked figure gestured for her to follow. Kyra raised an eyebrow but complied, curiosity pulling her forward. The figure led her down a narrow alley, far from the busy main street. When they finally stopped, he pulled back his hood, revealing a familiar face, Turok, a grizzled half-Solarii, half-human operative she had worked with once before. "I didn't think I'd see you here, Kyra," he said with a smirk. His voice held the dry humor of someone who knew the risks but didn't mind them. "Turok, what brings you to Zaloria?" she replied, her tone neutral. "Word's out that you're hunting someone important. Thought I might lend a hand if you're interested," he said, his gaze flicking to her weapon. "Draven Hale has stirred quite a few waves around here. The locals are edgy, and they know he's got powerful connections. If you're looking to track his influence, I can point you in the right direction." She was tempted to dismiss him, to continue her mission alone. But Turok's knowledge of the local networks could be invaluable. She nodded, gesturing for him to lead the way. They moved through the twisting alleys and backstreets, each turn bringing them deeper into the heart of Zaloria's underworld. Turok filled her in on the factions vying for power, their leaders, and the alliances they had forged. Draven's influence, it seemed, was woven into the fabric of the local political landscape, like a virus that had taken root beneath the Council's radar. They finally reached a sprawling, industrial warehouse near the city's edge. It was heavily guarded, but Kyra noted the gaps in their security with practiced ease. Inside is a Council rebel cell, one that owes allegiance to Draven, Turok explained, his voice low. Their leader, Thran, claims to have direct contact with Draven. If you can get him to talk, we might learn something valuable. Kyra took a deep breath, feeling the thrill of the hunt sharpen her senses. She slipped into the warehouse under cover of shadows, her movements silent as she weaved between crates and machinery. Inside, she caught glimpses of Zalorian rebels, their thin exoskeletons gleaming as they moved with military precision. They spoke in hushed voices, their tones urgent, their body language betraying a sense of purpose. As she moved closer, her gaze settled on Thran. He was taller than the others, with an air of authority and a pair of glittering, compound eyes that scanned the room constantly. He wore a modified exosuit, bristling with weaponry and adorned with Draven's insignia, a reminder of the man whose influence now spanned across the stars. Kyra activated her cloaking device, blending into the surroundings as she moved to intercept Thran. But just as she approached, her device flickered, the energy surging and sputtering out with a soft crackle. A malfunction, Rare, but not impossible. She cursed under her breath, her cover blown, as several guards whirled to face her, weapons raised. Thran turned slowly, a thin smile stretching across his alien features as he sized her up. The spectral blade herself. I'd heard rumors, but I never thought the council would send you personally. Kyra leveled her gaze at him, assessing her options. She was outnumbered, but she wasn't without her resources. Dravenhale has given you a death sentence, she replied coldly. I'm here to carry it out. Thran's smile didn't waver. You might find that Draven's followers are not so easily dispatched. He motioned to his guards, who closed in around her, their weapons glinting in the dim light. Kyra moved swiftly, her training taking over as she evaded their attacks with precision, her every movement a calculated response. She disarmed the first guard with a swift twist, sending him sprawling. The second lunged at her, but she ducked under his swing, landing a punch that sent him reeling. But Thran was no amateur, and as she engaged his guards, he activated a defense protocol on his suit. A holographic barrier shimmered into existence around him, deflecting her attacks as he unleashed a barrage of plasma fire in her direction. Kyra dodged, her focus sharp as she analyzed the shield's weaknesses. Turok, watching from his hiding place, took advantage of the distraction, slipping a small EMP device from his pocket and tossing it toward Thran. It landed just outside the barrier's edge, releasing a pulse that disrupted the holographic field with a crackle of energy. With his defenses down, Thran stumbled, momentarily vulnerable. Kyra didn't hesitate. She moved in, her weapon aimed at his throat, her expression cold and unyielding. "Where is Draven?" she demanded, her voice low. Thran's compound eyes narrowed, but there was a flicker of something, fear, perhaps, in his gaze. "You think you can stop him? Dravenhale is more than just one man. He's an idea, a movement. Kill me, and there will be others." Kyra's grip tightened on her weapon, her patience wearing thin. "Answer me." But before Thran could respond, a rumble shook the warehouse, the walls trembling as an explosion tore through the far side of the building. The impact sent debris crashing around them, and Kyra barely had time to react as she shielded herself from the falling wreckage. Through the smoke and chaos, she glimpsed a small group of Draven's followers fleeing into the streets, their mission compromised. Thran, however, remained where he was, his expression defiant even in the face of death. Turok appeared at her side, his face grim. They set off charges, probably to cover their escape. "We need to get out of here before this whole place comes down." Kyra glanced back at Thran, weighing her options. Her mission was to eliminate anyone connected to Dravenhale, but there was something in Thran's words that struck her, a hint of a larger plan she hadn't yet uncovered. Killing him might silence one source of information, but she had the feeling he was only one piece in a much larger puzzle. Reluctantly, she lowered her weapon, stepping back as she turned to follow Turok out of the crumbling warehouse. They made it to safety just as the building collapsed, the explosion illuminating the night sky. As they stood amidst the ruins, Kyra felt a surge of frustration and curiosity, a dangerous combination. This mission was proving to be far more complex than she had anticipated, and the more she learned, the more questions arose. Turok's voice broke through her thoughts. "Looks like Draven's reach is bigger than we thought. If he's built a network here, there could be more of his allies spread across the rim." Kyra nodded, her resolve hardening. She had her mission, and she would see it through. But the doubts, the questions, the hints of something larger, they lingered, casting a shadow over her every step. With a final glance at the smoldering ruins, she turned and began planning her next move. The vast plains of Varric Prime stretched out beneath a crimson sky, its once peaceful horizon now filled with smoke and the flickering lights of battle. Kyra Sinkar crouched behind a ridge, her breathing steady despite the turmoil unfolding around her. This was not how she had envisioned the mission progressing. The Council's directive to eliminate Dravenhale had grown into something much larger, something that now threatened to upend the galaxy's fragile balance. The ground shook as artillery fire from coalition forces blasted the valley, scattering rock and debris. Beside her, Turok was assessing their position, his face grim as he examined the map on his tactical device. "We're pinned down. Draven's forces are holding them off at the northern ridge, but it won't last." Kyra clenched her jaw, scanning the battlefield. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Draven's followers, a ragtag alliance of species rebelling against the Galactic Council's control, had been caught off guard by the sheer force of the Coalition's attack. Their makeshift fortifications were no match for the advanced weaponry of the Council's forces, and Kyra knew that if they didn't move quickly, their position would be overrun. "Turok," she said, her voice steady, "we need to flank them. Draw their forces away from the ridge, and cut off their supply line. It's the only way to break through." He gave her a skeptical look. "That's a death wish, Kyra. They'll see us coming a mile away." "Not if we move fast enough," she replied, a glint of determination in her eyes. She'd been in situations like this before, facing impossible odds, and in each of those instances it had been her adaptability, her willingness to think beyond protocol, that had led her to victory. Turok studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fine. But if we make it through this, I'm calling the shots next time." They set off, navigating the rocky terrain with a speed and agility that belied the chaos around them. Kyra's mind raced as she calculated the approach, her senses heightened by the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her suit's sensors picked up energy signatures from the Coalition's heavy artillery, and she adjusted their path accordingly, steering clear of the strongest concentrations. As they approached the enemy's flank, Kyra activated her cloaking device, her form shimmering briefly before blending into the surroundings. Turok followed suit, and together they crept closer to the Coalition's supply line, the sounds of battle echoing around them. They reached a vantage point overlooking the supply convoy, its vehicles heavily guarded by Coalition soldiers. Kyra observed their formations, noting the gaps in their defenses and the patterns in their movements. She gestured to Turok, indicating the weak points, and they prepared to strike. With a silent nod, they moved in, swift and deadly. Kyra took out the first guard with a precise shot to the neck, his body slumping to the ground before he could raise the alarm. Turok followed suit, neutralizing another guard with ruthless efficiency. They advanced, picking off soldiers with lethal precision, their movements perfectly synchronized. But as they reached the heart of the convoy, Kyra felt a sudden, inexplicable sense of foreboding. Something was wrong. A flash of movement caught her eye, and she turned just in time to see a Coalition officer emerge from one of the transport vehicles. His face was familiar: Captain Arlen, a Council operative known for his unyielding loyalty and tactical genius. Kyra had encountered him once before, on a mission in the Cairo system, and his presence here could only mean one thing. The Council had sent him to ensure her mission's success by any means necessary. Arlen's gaze locked onto hers, a cold smile curving his lips. "Kyra Sinkar. I was beginning to think you'd lost your touch." Her mind raced, calculating her options. Arlen was a formidable opponent, and his arrival changed everything. If he was here, it meant the Council was taking Draven's rebellion far more seriously than she'd realized. She raised her weapon, her stance defensive as she met his gaze. "The Council must be getting desperate if they're sending you to clean up their messes." Arlen chuckled, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Desperate? Hardly. I'm here to ensure the Council's interests are protected. And right now, that means dealing with you and your misguided loyalties." Kyra's grip tightened on her weapon, her mind racing as she processed his words. "Misguided? I'm carrying out the mission I was assigned." "Ah, but your assignment has evolved," he replied smoothly, his tone dripping with condescension. "The Council is aware of your interactions with Draven Hale. They question your commitment, Kyra. I'm here to remind you where your loyalties lie." She felt a surge of anger at his words, but she forced herself to remain calm. Arlen's presence complicated things, but it also confirmed what she had begun to suspect. The Council was hiding something. Draven's rebellion wasn't just a threat to their authority. It was a threat to something much deeper, something they were willing to go to great lengths to suppress. Before she could respond, Arlen raised his hand, signaling to the coalition soldiers flanking him. "Take her into custody," he ordered, his voice cold and commanding. Kyra's instincts kicked in, and she moved before the soldiers could react. She lunged at Arlen, her blade flashing as she struck. He dodged, countering with a swift punch that sent her reeling. But she recovered quickly, using the momentum to her advantage as she pivoted, her blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. Around them, chaos erupted as the coalition soldiers opened fire, their weapons blazing as they tried to contain her. Kyra fought with a ferocity born of desperation, her movements a blur as she evaded their attacks, taking down each soldier with ruthless efficiency. But Arlen was relentless, his attacks calculated and unyielding. He was her equal in skill, and each strike, each counter, felt like a deadly dance of wills. She could see the cold determination in his eyes, the ruthless ambition that had made him one of the Council's most feared operatives. As they fought, a sudden explosion rocked the convoy, sending debris flying in all directions. Kyra seized the opportunity, using the chaos to her advantage as she broke free from Arlen's grasp, her mind racing as she formulated her next move. She spotted Tarak a few meters away, his face bloodied but resolute as he fought off a group of coalition soldiers. She moved toward him, her movements swift and precise as she cut down the enemies in her path. "Kyra," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the sounds of battle. "We need to get out of here." She nodded, her gaze briefly meeting his before she turned back to face Arlen. He was still standing amidst the wreckage, his eyes narrowed as he watched her with a mixture of anger and admiration. "This isn't over, Sinkar," he called out, his voice filled with venom. "The Council will never forgive this betrayal." She met his gaze, her expression steely as she replied, "Then they'll have to catch me first?" With that, she and Tarak retreated, disappearing into the smoke and shadows as they made their escape. But even as they fled, Kyra knew that her conflict with the Council was far from over. Arlen's presence had revealed the Council's true intentions, and her loyalty was no longer something she could offer unconditionally. As they regrouped with Draven's forces, Kyra felt a strange sense of clarity settle over her. She had been a weapon for the Council, a tool used to enforce their will without question. But now, she was beginning to see the cracks in their authority, the lies they had built their power upon. And she was no longer willing to be their pawn. The stark silence that followed the Council's ultimatum weighed heavily on the rebel outpost. All around Kyra, Draven's forces prepared for the inevitable confrontation, moving with grim determination as they fortified their positions. The Council's forces would arrive within hours, and Kyra knew that this battle would decide not only the fate of Draven's rebellion but her own future as well. She took a moment to survey the outpost, watching as alien and human allies worked together, their disparate forms unified by a common goal. Draven had managed to bring together individuals who had once been enemies, fostering a fragile alliance against the Council's tyranny. And somewhere in that fragile unity, Kyra saw a reflection of her own transformation. She had once been the Council's weapon, an assassin who followed orders without question. But now she was fighting for something more, a cause she believed in, a future she could stand behind. As she turned back to the command center, Draven approached, his face somber yet resolute. "They'll be here soon," he said, his voice steady. "Our scouts have confirmed their fleet is moving in from the northern sector." Kyra nodded, her expression unwavering. "I'll be ready. Arlen is leading the assault, isn't he?" Draven's eyes hardened. "Yes. He's been sent to ensure that this rebellion ends here and now. The Council can't afford to let us continue." For a moment they stood in silence, both acutely aware of the odds they faced. Draven had become more than just an assignment to her. He was a symbol of the change she had undergone, a reminder of her journey from Council enforcer to rebel. "Kyra," Draven said softly, breaking the silence, You don't have to do this. You've already risked everything to stand with us. No one would blame you if you left." But Kyra shook her head, a determined glint in her eyes. "I didn't come this far to walk away. The council has to be stopped, and I'm going to see this through." Draven's expression softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of trust and camaraderie. "Then let's make them remember this day." As the hours passed, the tension within the outpost grew, each minute bringing them closer to the final confrontation. When the council's fleet appeared on the horizon, the sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a vast formation of ships bristling with weapons, their metallic hulls gleaming in the dim light. The first wave of council forces descended upon the outpost with a fury that shook the very ground. Explosions erupted across the landscape as Draven's forces fought back, their defenses strained but unyielding. Kyra moved through the chaos with practiced precision, her every move a testament to her years of training. She dispatched enemy soldiers with ruthless efficiency, her focus unbroken even as the battle raged around her. But she knew that Arlen was out there, leading the assault with the same cold determination she had once admired. And as she fought her way through the council's forces, she felt his presence drawing closer, a reminder that her past was not so easily left behind. At last, she spotted him amidst the smoke and fire, his dark armor a stark contrast against the destruction surrounding him. Their eyes met across the battlefield, and for a moment, everything else faded away. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the final confrontation between assassin and commander, between loyalty and defiance. Without hesitation, she moved toward him, her blade drawn, her every step fueled by the memories of the lives she had taken, the missions she had completed in the name of the council's authority. Arlen met her charge with equal ferocity, his weapon flashing as he struck, their blades clashing with a resounding impact. They fought with a brutal intensity, each strike a test of skill and resolve. Arlen's movements were calculated, precise, each one a reminder of the training they had both undergone, the lessons drilled into them by the council's instructors. But Kyra was different now. She was no longer bound by the council's doctrine, and her fighting style had evolved, a blend of technique and intuition that kept Arlen on the defensive. As they clashed, he sneered at her, his voice filled with contempt. "You betrayed everything we stand for, Kyra. The council gave you purpose, made you more than a soldier." She parried his strike, her eyes blazing with defiance. "The council used me, Arlen. They used both of us, and you're too blind to see it." He laughed, a hollow sound filled with bitterness. "Purpose is purpose, Kyra. You can't escape what you are." But she shook her head, her resolve unwavering. "I'm more than just their weapon. I fight for something real now." With a final surge of strength, she drove him back, her blade finding its mark as it cut through his defenses. Arlen staggered, his expression one of shock and disbelief as he fell to his knees, his weapon clattering to the ground. Kyra knelt beside him, her gaze steady as she looked into his eyes. "The council may have given us purpose, but it's our choices that define us. You chose loyalty to a regime that doesn't care about you. I chose to fight for something that matters." Arlen's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, she saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. But it was too late. His injuries were fatal, and as he took his last breath, Kyra felt a pang of sorrow for the comrade he had once been. The battle continued around her, but Kyra felt a strange sense of clarity settle over her as she rose to her feet. She had faced her past, confronted the council's lies, and emerged stronger for it. The person she had become was no longer defined by the council's orders or the missions she had completed in their name. She joined Draven at the command post, her expression one of quiet determination as they coordinated the final stages of the battle. Together, they fought with renewed strength, rallying their forces as they pushed back the council's remaining soldiers. One by one, the council's ships retreated, their forces broken by the unexpected resistance they had encountered. When the last council ship disappeared over the horizon, a cheer erupted from Draven's forces, a celebration of their hard-won victory. But Kyra stood apart from the crowd, her gaze fixed on the battlefield, her thoughts lingering on the lives lost and the path that lay ahead. Draven approached her, his expression one of quiet gratitude. "We couldn't have done this without you, Kyra. You gave us hope when we needed it most." She looked at him, a faint smile touching her lips. "It wasn't just me, Draven. It was all of us." As the sun set over the ruins of the outpost, Kyra felt a sense of peace settle over her, a feeling she had not known in years. She had fought for something greater than herself, and in doing so, she had found a purpose that no council mission could ever provide. But as she looked out at the stars, she knew that her journey was far from over. The council would not forget her betrayal, and there would be others who would rise to challenge their authority. She was no longer bound by their orders, but she was still a warrior, still a survivor. And as long as there were battles to be fought, she would be there, standing on the front lines, fighting for the future she believed in.